Hi everyone, good evening. I'm Jane at Rockin' Worms. I'm glad you're joining me tonight. I am going to show you whether or not the worms like my vegetable powder as a food source. But in order to show you that, we're going to take a little scenic route to get there because I want to do a mini sift out on the bin before I get into the feed zone. So what I want to show you right away is my work table setup when I do this kind of procedure, which is again basically sifting out my grow out bin, and doing a feed. Okay, so this is how I've learned to set it up for it to be the most efficient for me, and I will explain to you what each bin section does as I use it. So let's get right into working on the bin so we can see eventually, shortly, how the worms like or don't like the vegetable powder as a food source. So this is my bin, just how it came off my shelf. This bin was set up originally on March 25th. It is now July 13th. So not quite, what is that, 4 months old, not quite 4 months old. And this was a cocoon bin, okay? So it started off with all cocoons and a handful of nanny worms in the beginning. There have been no worms taken in or out of this bin as far as I can recall. So let's see how they're doing. Okay, so I've got a couple sprouts here and I have a worm right here on top. Let's just pick him out and look at him while we got him. Nice yellow tail. You can see a little bit of the clitellum there. So this is an adult breeder age red wiggler. And I'm just going to put him down here at the non-end that I'm going to be working on. All right, so what I'm going to do is a little bit of a sift out. My grow out bins are generally in desperate need of a sift out. And I should have done it honestly several weeks ago, but I didn't have any pre-composted bedding to replace any castings I took out, and I didn't want to just reduce their living quarters, their living space, without replacing it with something else, because all that would do is just increase the density, and I wasn't comfortable doing that. Now, what I could have done is I could have thought to use prepared bedding instead of pre-compost bedding to kind of eke me along, but I didn't think of it. But if you're in a situation where you can't make pre-composted bedding, or like me, you're kind of pushed and you need some type of bedding, prepared bedding would work as a good interim solution. Like I said, I just thought of that too late, but I did make a video on that and upload how to make prepared bedding just the other day, and I'll link that down in the description so you can watch that. So you can just have another option for bedding for your worms, okay? Now, what I'm doing here is I'm sifting out from the bin, and here is what I've kind of learned how to do, because this bedding is very moist. If I just grab into it, I'm going to end up making more like mud balls than I am going to be keeping it light and fluffy. Keeping it light and fluffy before I sift it gives me an opportunity to at least get some of it sifted and the volume out of this bin, so I can replace that volume with fresh bedding. Okay, so describing what I'm doing as I'm doing it, this is my preferred 1/8 inch screen for sifting. I prefer that over the 1/4 inch screen. It's just a personal preference. And I've thought about, why I have this preference. And I think I'm just going to blame Captain Matt for this. Because when I started out, he was the first worm YouTube channel I watched. And when I was watching him, he used his Rockwood sifter to sift his cocoons and his castings and separate out his adult worms. And that Brockwood sifter screen he was using was a 3/32 screen. So very fine. And I thought, well, I guess that's what you're supposed to use, right? Well, yes, but I didn't know that you could actually use different size screens effectively. So I went looking for something that was 3/32 of a size. And I did find it kind of, sort of, and that was an over the sink strainer with a fine mesh. But I did learn after a while that I didn't have to be quite that fine, and so then I went to the 1/8. And below this is a 1/12 screen, which again is closer to the 3/32 screen. So this stuff is very close to what Captain Matt gets out of his Brockwood sifter. And in case you're wondering, those Brockwood sifters are like a couple $1,000s. So yeah, I wasn't going to be able to swing that one, especially in the beginning of this worm journey when I wasn't even sure I was going to stick with it. So even investing in these green screens was a decision point for me, but they work really well. And if you're in the market for green screens, I have a community post that shows the link to where I bought my green screens for about half the price, a little bit more than half the price of what Amazon has, the exact same screen, same manufacturer, everything. So if you're in the market for, sifter screens, check out that community post. I am not affiliated with the company Cal, C-A-L Ranch. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I'm just a happy customer with their screen and with their pricing. So check that out. All right, so I'm already getting down to where this is gonna not start sifting very well. So what I'm doing is after I, scrape off the top, sift out what I can, the stuff that does not go through the 1/8 goes into this container to hold it, okay? And the stuff that goes through the 1/8 inch screen, but not the 1/12, and it's mainly not going through the 1/12 because it's really quite moist, really moist. You can see the moisture. And even just tapping it, it's not breaking apart very much. So it's not surprising it's not going through the finer sieve. But this is, really good castings. All right, what I'm gonna do with these castings that probably have some cocoons in it is I'm gonna put it in this bin. Now the castings that were already in this bin is from the bin I sifted out last night that I have not yet had a chance to pick through for the, couple dozen cocoons that will be in there. Okay, so let me see if I want to do another sift. Nah, I think I'm going to leave it. Okay, so where am I now? I am taking out the easy castings from the top layer of the bin that are at least a little bit drier. I've sifted out what I could, put the overs into this bin, and put the castings that went through the 1/8 but not the 1/12 into this bin container holding box. And the stuff, a little bit that did go through the 1/12 is what I consider to be, you know, only castings. Yes, there's probably a few cocoons in there, but I'm willing to let those go into the garden as is. This will go directly into a castings bucket. All right. So now we're going to start working on this bin and working toward that feed zone to see how the worms are acting on the vegetable powder. So in order to start doing that, working toward that end, I'm going to take this stuff I did not sift. It looks like I could have, but you know what? It's fine. If I don't sift it this time, I'll sift it next time. I'm just aerating it a little bit because I do want to still, you know, have it dry down, continue to dry down, because when I do come back and sift it, it'll be that much drier and easier, and I'll get more out. This is kind of, again, how I'm doing this is a little bit, actually it's more than a little bit. It's very much like the wedge method, which I started playing with a couple weeks ago with a long bin. I'm finding that I like it, even in the smaller bins. It's a little bit harder to, you know, get the real estate to do it, but the concept of taking out castings, moving your sections down and aerating it so it can start to dry down, agitate the worms that are in here a little bit so they start moving over to the working end of the bin, is all conceptually the same as a wedge system, which again is just another type of horizontal migration method. Also, you know what I want to point out? You can see that there are worms in this section, which is away from the feed zone, but not that many, right? There's some, but not tons, okay? So that does mean that the food and moisture on this end is reducing and the worms are moving down to what I call the working end of the bin. So that's good. That's actually what I want. So now we're just going to keep moving down. I'm moving gently because I know I'm coming up on the food zone, and I want to show you what that looks like, because I have not been in this bin, so I don't know what this bin looks like, but I have sifted out some of the other bins that I did the vegetable feeding in. So I'm hoping / assuming that this bin will look similar. Okay, we're getting close. Okay, you ready? I'm going to take off the top layer, getting down into it. And you can see I'm starting to get more worms. I'm getting closer to the feed zone. More worms. And here we go. This is the napkin I used. And here we go. So here is a bunch of worms that were all in this feed zone. This is the vegetable powder, okay? The vegetable powder, I call it vegetable, but there's fruits in there too, okay? I puree it up in my blender. I put it on a dehydrating tray and I dehydrate it until it's, you know, pretty dry. And then I break it up into shards and I powder it, which, by the way, let me get a couple of these worms out here so I don't lose them. They're all over the gloves. Okay, which looks like this. This is the vegetable powder, okay? You can see the color variations. That's because they're different mixes. That's down here in the bottom is probably more banana peels, and the stuff on the top that's more orangey is probably more butternut squash or pumpkin, you know, stuff like that, okay? So I powder it, it goes into a container, and then I used it on this last feeding. All I fed them was vegetable powder. That was it, vegetable powder. The previous feeding they had was a mix of fast and slow foods, but this one was vegetable powder. So what I am seeing is that because the vegetable powder is dehydrated, that when it hits the moisture in the bin, it starts to rehydrate and turns into a kind of a paste, okay? Think of it like, I don't know, like a thick toothpaste. And the worms have no trouble. Here's a little baby. Worms have no problem getting into this paste. You can see all the little baby worms around my gloves. I'm gonna have a nice challenge on getting all these off of my gloves. But anyways, so what I want to point out is, one, obviously the worms like the vegetable powder. They're all in here. That would, be a worm ball as far as I'm concerned. They're all into the feed zone here. And I'm sure if I come down here, there's even more. And what I'm going to do is start moving this over. Okay, as part of the wedge method, the horizontal migration, I'm just moving it over here. I'm taking the opportunity to break up the vegetable paste a little bit. I, want to limit the opportunities for anaerobic because it is a paste. It could go anaerobic. I'm not smelling that it has, but it is something I do keep in mind. So when I go in and check and I want to take the opportunity to break it up a little bit, I think it's a good idea. Just getting some more air in there so it doesn't go nasty smelling. Okay, what I started to say a minute ago before I interrupted myself is the dehydrated vegetables are exactly that. They're dehydrated. It is fundamentally different than worm chow. So worm chow, this is a piece of something, hair or something. Get it off my glove. I can't get it off my glove. Hold on a sec. Thank you, cameraman. It's fundamentally different than worm chow. Here's another worm ball here. Fundamentally different than worm chow. Worm chow is made from flour, from oatmeal, from, dried crackers or bread, things like that. They are processed. They're not dehydrated. So when you put that worm chow made from those items into your bin, they don't rehydrate. Okay, they can get clumpy because they're gonna, somewhat absorb water, but not quite to the same extent that the worm chow, that the vegetable powder does. Okay, so they're fundamentally different, but obviously these worms are liking it all the same. Let's see if I got any more worms down here. Yep. So lots of worms. They seem to be liking that worm chow just fine. Okay, so what am I going to do now to finish up this bin? As I'm putting all this down here, still aerating it, which is always a good idea. Okay, that's close enough. Close enough is good enough, people. Don't drive yourselves crazy. The worms don't care, so, try not to get too caught up in it yourself. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to dump the overs from my sifting. Again, it was the stuff that did not go through the 1/8 inch screen. Quick brush down, a couple little worms stuck there. So it is important you go back and make sure you get everybody. Okay, nice brush off. Okay, again, pretty good. Okay, so that was the overs that didn't go through. I'm gonna use this as my base, and I'm gonna give them a feeding. So they will finish up what's in here. this section of the bin, including the vegetable powder, and then move into the new feeding area, vacating this section so I can come back and sift it. Now I have a little escapee here. Wait, don't do that. I have a little escapee here on the table. So I'm going to gently pick him up and put him with his buddies. Okay, so I like using a napkin on the bottom. Gives me an indication of where I fed last. Lots of times it's already gone when I go back in, but it's still a good use for your used napkins, right? Put them in your worm bin. Don't put them in your garbage. Okay. Now, this bin is what I'm going to feed them. Not all of this, but most of it. This is lettuce that I got from my vegetable guy that I've frozen and defrosted. And what I want to show you with this in particular is how much liquid can come off of your frozen foods when you feed frozen foods into your worm bin. This is important because you need to understand the amount of liquid you're putting in your bin so you can manage that effectively, because otherwise you're going to end up with, a mud pool in your worm bin, which you may not want and be unpleasantly surprised. So as it defrosts, again, this is just lettuce, but it gives off a lot of liquid. This bowl of liquid, I am not kidding you, came 100% entirely out of this bin during the defrosting process. Okay? That was it. So I didn't add anything, I didn't take anything away. All I did was pour it out. And now all this liquid, if I hadn't done this, would have gone into this worm bin. That would have been, a lot. And I just don't want to do that. So I do want you to understand how much liquid you can be putting into your worm bins when you put in frozen foods. So of course you can do that, but you would have to put in a lot of dry material as well to offset and absorb that liquid. It's a perfectly fine way of doing it. Many people do it that way and it works for them. Since I am putting in pre-composted bedding that is all ready, I'm squeezing this out so I can get even more liquid out of the vegetables, the lettuce I'm going to be putting in. Okay. Since I'm already putting in pre-composted bedding, which has a good, nice level of moisture in it, I don't, at this point, need to add any more additional moisture than absolutely necessary. So again, I found this out by trial and error. Why is my worm bin so wet? All I put in was food. What's going on? Well, ding, ding, ding. Putting in frozen food, which is good because freezing it breaks down the cell walls and allows the worms and the biota to get into it more quickly. So freezing is good, but the secondary result is that vegetable also releases a whole, ton of liquid. And I just wasn't factoring that in the beginning. So my bins were getting too wet. So this is one way I've determined to offset that liquid a little bit by just defrosting the food first, squeezing it out, and then putting it in the worm bin. And as I'm sure you can guess, I do not let this liquid go to waste. I pour it into a empty gallon jug and I just keep putting in vegetable water into that jug. And then I use this liquid when I'm making pre-compost, okay? And I'll link that pre-compost tabletop indoor pre-compost video playlist as well because I'm a huge fan of it. So that vegetable water does not go to waste either. Okay, so now I just need to finish up my feeding. Now that I have that delicious looking lettuce in there, I'm gonna just give them the lightest sprinkle of worm chow. just again to, entice them to come over. They really like worm chow. I think it's the carbs in the flour that they're really interested in. This is a little azomite, so I'm adding in micro minerals in particular, and then a little lime, agricultural lime, to add some grit, offset pH, and then for the heck of it, I am going to add a little bit more vegetable powder, okay? So I am doing this type of feeding this time for two reasons. One, I think food variety is healthy for all animals, humans and worms. So 2 feeds ago, I gave them all fast food of lettuce. And then last feed, I gave them, actually 3 feeds ago, I gave them all fast food lettuce because that's what I had. Then 2 feeds ago, I gave them a mix of fast and slow foods. Okay, so, peppers, tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, things like that. And then this most recent last feed, I gave them all the vegetable powder. So this time, I'm kind of cycling back to giving them all fast food. So they're getting the variety. Okay, and the second reason I'm giving them fast food is, yes, I got a whole bunch of lettuces from my veg guy this past week, and I need to, get that out of my freezer. So I have to cycle. All right, so what I'm gonna do lastly on top is, actually I'm gonna move some of this back here. That's what I'm gonna do. I did that. I'm gonna move some of that back there. On top, I'm adding a nice dose of my indoor pre-compost bedding. And like I said, it has moisture. It's holding together, but it's breaking apart easily. So even though it's on the top and not the bottom, that moisture from the lettuce will permeate the whole section. The worms will come in and just start gobbling this up. All right, we're done. So let me just cover this up. This actually goes on this, hold on. Here it is. So what I'm going to do is I do want to start drying down this end for sifting. So I'm going to just cover half the bin with the newspaper. I'll just fold it back a little bit. Couple hitchhikers here on the newspaper because they like newspaper as well. Go figure. And then I am covering just this half up so it remains moist and dark and happy for the worms. So again, they'll move from the end I want to sift down to the working end of the bin. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label the bin. And this over here are 3 of the bins I've already done this process to, exactly what you saw tonight. And I'm just labeling it drying down to sift, and just to show you, exactly the same. And you can see that this is already drying down because this has just been, this one has just been 2 days. So I can probably sift this out in the next couple days. All right, so that's that. So what I want you to take away from this is vegetable powder. If you get excess vegetables, if you can, dehydrate them down or freeze them and powder them, it is a good source of food for your worms. They like it. So give it to them. All right. So, yeah. So that's it. I hope you have a good rest of your evening. If you have any questions or comments, please put them down below. I appreciate it when you like and subscribe because that helps me move my channel along. And otherwise, I hope you have, a great, happy worm and a happy rest of the evening. I am yours in the dirt, Jane.